Welcome to the People and Planet podcast, a show all about human health, planetary health, and the links between them. I'm your host, Ali Al-Hamed, an integrative nutrition health coach with a master's in environmental sustainability. I spent most of my life exploring these topics, and this podcast is my effort to collect and deliver information from experts to improve the quality of your life and that of our planet. Thank you so much for being here. This podcast is for educational purposes only and should never replace the advice of your doctor or physician. Always consult a medical professional before making any changes or adding anything new to your diet, lifestyle, or medication protocol. Lulu, thank you so much for being here with me today. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. You and I have known each other for a few years. We've worked together with clients. We have a very similar practice, but at the same time, you're one of the functional people that I rely on, functional practitioners that I rely on in Kuwait to do those deep dive medical tests, to help my clients with supplements. And I absolutely love the work that you're doing. So thank you so much for being here and willing
Thanks
to
for
share your
having
knowledge.
me. Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm so excited. I'm so proud of what you've done. And you're also one of literally, I always tell people you're the only person I refer to. You're the only practitioner that I refer people to because you're so good at what you do. And I think your work is so needed. And I think we complement each other really well. So I'm excited to get into these topics with you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for
Yeah.
saying that. Yeah, I think we complement each other. We are from
Yes.
the same, I feel like we're cut from a similar fabric in the sense that we
Mm-hmm.
see health in a very holistic way. But there's a lot of things in my practice that I need your support on and things in your practice that you call me for. And that's why I
Exactly.
love having these conversations with you because there's so many blind spots in my practice that
True.
I rely on you for. So
Yeah, same.
yeah,
I
and
mean, it's the same for me because like I work really well with diagnostics and treatment, but then there's all of this in between stuff where like the client really needs all the support that they can get when it comes to like stress management and habit formation, all kinds of stuff that really pulls things together. So yeah, I do think it's such a good compliment.
Yeah. And one of the reasons I rely on you is for your gut health expertise. I mean, there's a lot I can do with just like general stress management and making sure my clients are getting good sleep and eating lots of vegetables. But when they're chronically bloated or there's clearly something going on that I'm not being able to look into, I rely on your tests and your diagnosis. And one of the reasons I rely on you is because of your gut health expertise. I mean, there's a lot that can be handled with lifestyle, like getting good sleep and getting enough fruits and vegetables and stress management.
Yeah.
But the tests and the diagnosis, like you say, that's out of my scope. So can you please share with everybody what kind of, work you do around gut health? What are some of the most basic steps you kind of recommend for people? Let's just start with gut and like we'll take it
Sure.
from there.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, there's a reason why they say all disease begins in the gut because it is related to everything from sleep to stress to mental health issues to energy production. And obviously, like, there's a weight and metabolic component as well. So, even though I wasn't intentionally going to specialize in gut health because I entered functional medicine where you try to find the root cause of everything, I did actually find that the majority of health issues are tied to gut issues. So I did end up specializing in it. And basically what I do is I sit with a client, take their history, and figure out what potential trigger caused their gut issues. And then based on that, I'll recommend some testing. And it's like you said, diagnostics are a huge part of what I do because I really believe that in order to treat something effectively, you have to figure out what it is that you're treating. So we do several types of testing. I do a comprehensive digestive stool analysis, which looks at everything in your gut. It's like a great snapshot of what's happening in terms of your microbiome balance. So we look at levels of good bacteria. We look at bacterial infections, which is very different than something like SIBO or bacterial overgrowth. We look to see if you have any kind of parasitic infections, and then there's a whole section on intestinal health in general, like inflammation levels, how good you are at producing digestive enzymes, whether you have like a really strong gut immune system, whether you have like food sensitivities. So that's the main test that I recommend. And then I also recommend something called an organic acids test, which looks at certain markers that are more related to brain function, really. Like it's great for people who have symptoms of, for example, like fungal overgrowth, which comes with a lot of brain symptoms like anxiety, brain fog, trouble concentrating, a lot of like mood changes, irritability, like being quick to like to respond. So, and also it has a lot of sections on like your detoxification pathways and your cellular health, again, because your gut is related to all of these issues. So those are the main two tests that I do. And then I treat based on the test findings and also the client's symptoms. Because you have to match the test results to the client. You can't just like hand out a bunch of supplements like allopathic medicine, which is what we try to get away from.
Can you please unpack that for me? So why am I going to come and do your comprehensive testing and not go to a conventional doctor or GI doctor? Like, what's the difference between the functional approach and the conventional approach? Because I don't think a lot of people really appreciate or understand the definition of
Yeah,
a
that's
functional
true.
medicine and a functional practitioner.
That's true. So, well, that's a really good question. I feel like I was going to say especially in Kuwait, but to be honest, I see it also with a lot of international clients where initially when they have any kind, people have any kind of not digestive health issue, they tend to go to conventional doctors because they want an answer. And then they kind of get bumped around from like either diagnosis to diagnosis, or they say, like your symptoms are stress related, or they kind of like gaslight the patient until eventually they get to a functional medicine practitioner because they want to figure out what is the reason that I have all of these issues. So the difference between a conventional medicine doctor and a functional practitioner, do you want me to tell you just in relation to gut issues or just in general?
Yeah, like why am I coming to you for my gut health problems and not to a GI
Okay.
doctor who's a
Okay.
gastroenterologist who's meant to
Yeah.
specialize in the gut?
Yeah. Well, okay. So gastroenterologists are generally great for detecting disease. So they're great for detecting something like a disease process that is treatable or not curable, but treatable or manageable by medication. But the problem with the conventional approach is it focuses on symptoms. So it focuses on managing your symptoms as opposed to focusing on treating the root cause of the issue, which means if you work with a conventional doctor, you're more likely to continue to experience your symptoms, but take medication probably for a very, very long time, like years and years and years, if not for the rest of your life. And yeah, you will still continue to experience symptoms, but with a functional practitioner, because they're so focused on figuring out what is the root cause of your problem, you will probably work over several months to treat the underlying issue, which then means you have resolution of symptoms. So then you don't have to manage it for the rest of your life. And generally, people with chronic issues should turn to functional medicine. So if you have symptoms that you experience on a daily basis, like most days of the week, that are really affecting your daily life, that there's probably some kind of underlying dysfunction that needs to be addressed. And conventional medicine doesn't usually address underlying dysfunction. It addresses surface level symptoms.
And I think also if the functional approach has a wider snapshot into what's going on in the gut, right? I think your tests are a lot more comprehensive versus
Yes.
a
So
typical
yes.
GI.
Yeah. So aside from that, so in terms of testing, the majority of my clients that go to a doctor, initially they either get medication to treat their symptoms, and then if the medications don't work, they'll either recommend a colonoscopy or an endoscopy. But like I said, with that kind of testing, you only see when like a disease process has started. So maybe like they can diagnose you with what's it called, inflammatory bowel disease, so something like Crohn's or ulcerative colitis, or they can tell you, well, there's inflammation, you have gastritis, you have some kind of an infection, but they can't tell you what's causing the inflammation. Even if you do end up getting diagnosed with a disease process, they can't tell you why your gut health is so compromised that the inflammation, like it can't put out the inflammatory process. So conventional medical testing doesn't really give you an answer as to why you have issues. But then functional medicine testing looks at your microbiome, your bacterial levels, overall markers that indicate root causes.
Yeah, and I read an amazing book called Fiber Fueled
Yeah.
about a GI doctor who did conventional medicine and studied, I think, for 10 years to be an MD. And he became a gastroenterologist, so GI doctor, conventional. And then he switched to being functional.
Yeah.
And he wrote in his book that, conventional GI doctors don't study food. They do
That's
nutrition for
so
about like
true.
2 weeks. And
Yeah.
we are the doctors of the gut, but you have no idea how food interacts with the system, the overall
Exactly.
system, and the gut. It's like mind blowing. So he's someone from both camps. And he talked about in his book that it's just all they're doing is studying medication. So you come with your
Exactly.
symptoms, and all they're doing is trying to find the right medication to just put a band-aid over the symptoms, which is why I
Exactly.
love functional practitioners where they're
True.
looking at why is this happening? There's the question of why,
Exactly.
right? Not
Exactly.
what.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's so true. It's what versus why. And there's a bit of an issue between conventional practice and functional practice because conventional doctors generally don't really acknowledge what we do. Usually, like when something is studied and is published, it takes about 17 years from when it's published for it to be transferred into like medical practice. So there's a bit of a lag between like conventional medicine and functional medicine because functional medicine stays up to date about like root causes, why this happens, like pathological pathways and stuff like that. But with conventional medicine, there's a bit of a lag with that implementation. So unfortunately, even though the information is there, they don't really acknowledge the importance of like a SIBO breath test or a stool test or the microbiome. So yeah, it's a little disappointing, but
Yeah.
it is really important. Like the nutritional component is really important. Microbiome component is really important. It's the baseline for any and all gut issues.
Can you talk about that a little bit? Like how food impacts the overall system, what's happening when people are eating more fruits and vegetables versus sugar and like junk food? I mean, people know that eating ice cream every day is not good for them, but they just think, oh,
Yeah,
I'm going to gain weight. But they don't
yeah,
realize that there's a domino effect, and the
exactly.
inflammation that's caused in the gut doesn't just stay in the gut. It can
True.
turn into chronic diseases
Yeah,
or mood disorders, or it can just domino
exactly.
into other things. So can you just unpack that a little bit more for us?
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of unpacking to do, but I'm gonna try. There's like so many different
Based
things I
level.
can mention. Yeah.
Okay.
So, well, okay, the first thing I'll say, there's two main phyla of bacteria. So you have something called Bacteroidetes and something called Firmicutes, and they're supposed to be in a very healthy ratio. When they're in a healthy ratio, your metabolic health is optimal, which means you can process sugar really well, your insulin works really well, your cellular health is also optimal. So like your energy production is good. And when you eat a more like standard American diet or like a processed foods diet, you tend to feed the bacteria in a way where the ratio gets thrown off. So you basically feed yourself into metabolic issues. But when you eat fruits and vegetables, foods with polyphenols, colored fruits, phytochemicals, and so on and so forth, you feed the bacteria in a way where the ratio puts you more in a healthy metabolic state. So this ratio is actually really important, and we do test for it in a GI map. And honestly speaking, a lot of people I've seen where like their food is healthy, their lifestyle is healthy, but they have insulin resistance or like they cannot manage their blood sugar no matter what they do. That ratio is completely off because they have a history of eating processed foods, chemical laden foods, not eating fruits and vegetables, not nourishing and feeding their good bacteria. And I can say the same thing about things like candida. So we are supposed to have a diverse microbiome. So we're supposed to have some good bacteria, some bad bacteria, some fungus, some parasites. The more diverse it is, the better it is for you. But the problem is, when does bad bacteria or fungus or parasites start affecting your health? It's when you feed them or you give them the opportunity to grow. So something like candida, which is really, really implicated in mental health issues, feeds off of sugar. So the more sugar you have, the more you feed candida, the more it grows. And then the more it grows, it also has like kind of like a cyclical effect where the more the candida grows, because it feeds on sugar, it gives you sugar cravings. So then when you have these uncontrollable sugar cravings, which is again, an example of how you and I work well together, because there's a habit component in there where their sugar intake led to an imbalance in the microbiome. But then once there's an imbalance in the microbiome, your candida is demanding sugar 5 times a day. So then it's really hard to control it just from a habit perspective, just from like, okay, well, I'm just going to clean up my diet and I'm going to get better, because then you have to treat the candida that grew, that grew in the first place. So those are 2 examples of what you eat affects your health, affects your mood. And basically it's just a good concept to have in mind, that when you're eating something, you're not just feeding yourself, you're literally feeding your microbiome. So the more healthy food you eat, the more fruits, veggies, fiber you eat, you're creating a more diverse, robust microbiome. And the more processed foods you eat, because it's already processed, it doesn't need that much of an effort, you're shifting the microbiome into an unhealthy place.
It's so funny because I always say to my clients, eating your fruits and vegetables is not about you. It's about your gut
Yes,
bugs.
that's
And I
so
actually,
true. Yeah,
I'm like, it's not even about you. Yes, they provide minerals
exactly.
and vitamins, but it's not even your cells that are absorbing those vitamins and minerals.
Exactly.
It's the gut microbiome. It's the bacteria or I use the word bacteria to just describe the whole microbiome. I
Yes.
know it's not
Yeah.
just bacteria,
Yeah.
but they're the ones absorbing the vitamins and the nutrients, and they're the ones keeping you healthy and happy. So you
True.
have to keep them healthy and well so that they take care of
Exactly.
you. And I
Yeah.
sometimes say to my clients, I'm like, I want you to think about your gut bugs like your pets. You
Yeah,
wouldn't
that's
just
so
like
true. Yeah.
you
I love thinking about
gotta
that. Yeah,
take
because
care
I
of them
have
and
a
it's not
pet.
about
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. True. Yeah. You have to be really conscious of what you put into your mouth, which I mean, I think it's really difficult, especially in, I was going to say our culture, but again, I see it a lot in like the Western culture, where like food accessibility, like we have the easiest access to food. You can order something and have it delivered within 15 minutes if you're hungry and you don't have time to cook. So yeah, we kind of have to be really conscious about it on a daily basis. And I feel like that's where people tend to fall short, because they don't realize that it's something that you have to put constant effort into.
Right. You mentioned something about candida and sugar cravings. I did read about this in the book called The Gut. I'm just saying the
Yeah.
book's titles in case people want to look
And
them up.
yeah.
And she talks about, I don't know if it was candida or another bacteria, that when you feed it and it grows to like pathogenic levels, which is like bad levels,
Yeah.
it actually has direct access to the brain to ask for more of
Yes.
its food. Have
Yeah.
you come across that? Is that true?
I'm not sure. Well, I do know that a lot of bacteria do have direct access to the brain. Well, actually, I'm not sure if you're referring to them like crossing the blood-brain barrier and getting into the brain, or if they affect the brain through the vagus nerve, because usually
Probably.
that's what happens. And also there's this pathway that I feel like people don't really understand, that there's this direct link between your gut and your brain. So that's called the vagus nerve. So any kind of imbalance in your gut is going to affect your mental health, or brain function in general, not just mental health in terms of mood. And this nerve has a bunch of nerves from the brain into this nerve that goes into the gut, but it also has a bunch of nerves from the gut into this nerves that communicates to the brain. But 90% of the nerves are from the gut to the brain. So you know how sometimes people go like, well, I have IBS, especially in our culture, where they're like, it's just stress induces it. I'm like, yeah, stress induces symptoms for you, but why is it that your friend, when she gets stressed out, she doesn't get symptoms? It's because something triggered the cycle in the first place for the vagus nerve to be activated. I find this link between gut health and mental health really fascinating. So you know how we have brain hormones? So we have serotonin, dopamine, epinephrine, and norepinephrine. And these brain hormones impact how we feel. So serotonin makes you happy. Epinephrine and norepinephrine make you like motivated and excited and give you drive. And dopamine is like your reward hormone. So these brain hormones are affected by inflammation, especially serotonin. And this is seen in people who have depression and anxiety. So when you have healthy levels of serotonin, you have a healthy mood. But when you have gut inflammation, what happens is the inflammatory process from the gut kind of like stops your body from producing serotonin and then pushes it towards something called quinolinic acid. So you have less serotonin, so you have less of your happy hormone, but you have more quinolinic acid. And quinolinic acid is excitatory. So it kind of like triggers your brain to fire in an abnormal way. So you're constantly triggered, constantly on edge, constantly like snappy. So it's for, people that are just find themselves like generally irritable and agitated, and like they're very reactive, a little bit aggressive. And you can see it in kids too. So kids with behavioral issues, you know how like, again, I keep like referring to Western versus Arab culture, but generally speaking, doctors tend to give antibiotics even when it's not needed. I've seen so many of my clients go in with like a viral infection, and then the blood tests show that it's a viral reaction, but they get given antibiotics and they take it. And then when it comes to kids, you have kids who have like recurrent ear infections, which actually is a big symptom of a dairy sensitivity. You have like ear infections, you have tonsillitis, you have chronic like throat infections. So when kids are constantly given antibiotics once or twice a year, which already once a year is too much because it takes 2 years to recover from one bout of antibiotic. So when kids take antibiotics and their microbiome gets thrown off, they'll start to develop behavioral issues. So ADHD, they'll generally tend to be like quite defensive and what's the word I'm looking for? Just a little bit aggressive. So it's like just reactive. Really interesting. Yeah, very reactive. And then they'll have issues with concentration. They'll have issues with school and schoolwork and, paying attention. So it's just really fascinating that this direct pathway exists, but a lot of people don't know about it. And then they start treating mental health issues with more medication, more diagnoses, more labels. And we need to move away, I think, from labels and focus more on bringing the body back into a healthy balance.
I always say on my Instagram and with clients that I eat for my mental health because
Yes.
like you're saying, all these things can be triggered from inflammation in the gut, which then can, trigger inflammation in the brain and cause all kinds of issues. And so our relationship with other people are affected.
Totally.
Because we're triggered, we're reactive,
Exactly.
we're unwell, we're moody.
Exactly.
So my relationship with my friends and my coworkers and mom and dad is now all impacted by what 100%. I'm eating because inflammation is caused by processed food and sugar and too much of certain things. So
True.
It's just so important to be careful about the diet that we're the food that we're feeding ourselves, because it has a ripple effect on everything. And I would also argue that it has a ripple effect or an impact on the relationship we have with ourselves. If we're always moody and triggered and sad, it's very hard to love ourselves and be kind to ourselves and be compassionate with ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, I speak from experience, and I'm really open about this because one of the main things that I discuss is the gut-brain axis, or like historically, like that's a lot of my content is about the gut-brain axis, because I went through it and I was mind blown that there are people walking around with the level of anxiety that I was experiencing, thinking that it was their fault. So for me, I had gotten food poisoning 3 times from the same restaurant. And I had a gut of steel, so like I just it didn't affect me. I thought it didn't affect me, but then by the 3rd time I had full-on SIBO. Like I knew it the week that I had the symptoms. I was like bloating severely after anything that I ate, and we can talk about symptoms of SIBO and symptoms of candida overdose so people can kind of get an idea of how these different things can affect them. But I didn't treat it because you need to be on like a bunch of supplements, and I was really busy. So I was like, I'm just going to treat this as soon as I get over this busy period. And I was getting more and more and more stressed and more anxious with time. But I thought it was work, right? Because you blame it around your surroundings initially. Until one day I woke up and I had anxiety. And I was like, wait, this isn't normal. Nothing happened in my day. My workload's completely fine. There's nothing about my circumstances that changed that's giving me this level of anxiety. I was like, oh my God, it's the SIBO. It's like my gut. And so I started taking supplements for it. And it was very uncomfortable anxiety. It was like affecting my day, like my hour to hour experience of my day. So I started taking the supplements, and I started with like a low dose. I was completely fine, didn't feel anything. The second I upped my dose, I had the most severe anxiety. I literally could not make it through like several minutes without like checking my phone and just being like, oh my God, when is this day going to be over? And then it was just really insightful for me to go through it, because I was like, how many people have all this anxiety, all this depression, all these like mental health issues, and they think it's their surroundings, or they think it's their environment, or they think it's their job or their relationship. So then obviously your relationships are going to change. If you think your your sister or your friend or your partner is triggering you in all these kinds of ways, it's going to cause issues. And then I do wanna mention that there is this genetic component to how much you respond to inflammation. So we do DNA tests as well, not for everyone, but just when it's relevant. But there's a whole section when it comes to your brain function that is related to mood in relation to inflammation. So I tested positive for almost all of the inflammatory markers. So I'm highly susceptible to developing depression if I have an inflammation. So whenever I do have symptoms of depression, I'll just go directly into like an anti-inflammatory diet, and I kid you not, within 2 to 3 weeks, all of my symptoms, all of my mental health symptoms are gone. So it is really powerful.
Yeah. Is this also in relation to what you were talking about when you were talking about neurotoxins, not neurotoxicity?
Well, neurotoxicity, that's more from the inflammation causing the serotonin to go into quinolinic acid and quinurinic acid. That causes neurotoxicity. That's what makes your brain fire. So that's it is related, but it really depends on how you present. Mm-hmm. For me, I present anxiety mostly, and sometimes depression, but yeah, that's when that happens, I know it's my gut. It's so straightforward. Yeah.
So you did mention, we're talking about the gut-brain axis, which is the relationship between the gut and the brain. And you did mention that about 90% of the information is actually coming from the gut up to the brain. Most people think the brain sits up here like a CEO and sends messages down, which it does, but a lot of messages are actually coming up.
Yes.
But we're talking about how the gut can impact cognitive function, brain fog, irritability, mood, anxiety, all these things. But at the same time, can you talk about how the way we think and how our brain can also impact inflammation? Because if we're eating relatively healthy, let's say, and there aren't any really huge inflammatory markers coming from the gut, but we're always thinking in a negative way, or we've got trauma, can that also trigger inflammation in the gut? Like the brain also can.
Yes, and it's mainly through its modulation of the microbiome. So they did this study where they took I think it was like a biopsy of someone's like gut, like the subject's gut. So they took kind of like a sample of their microbiome, and then they put them under stress, and they took a sample 20 minutes after the stressor, and they had seen that the microbiome shifted towards more pathogenic bacteria, less healthy bacteria. So when you're under chronic stress, that was just in 20 minutes. Can you imagine what would happen if you're under chronic stress from a demanding job, like a toxic relationship, just, a situation where like you're constantly unhappy or triggered or agitated? It would cause a chronic shift in your microbiome. So at that point, you have two problems. You have a stress problem, you have a dysregulated nervous system, but you also have a microbiome issue, and they kind of like affect each other in a cycle where and what I always say to my clients is it's takes a lot longer to fix your like approach to life and like your outlook on life. You have to put a lot of effort into like meditation, journaling, gratitude practices, whatever it is that works for you. But when you address your gut, you kind of see somewhat of an immediate shift within like a couple of months. So we need to kind of like put a pause into that cycle. So for me, I work on the gut, and then that's when I refer to you, because you can then work on the brain. And then they're having like, the mindset.
You often talk about how sleep and insomnia can also be impacted by the gut and gut inflammation. Can you share a little bit about that with us?
Yeah, this is also really fascinating. And honestly, this is why I love functional medicine / integrative medicine. Like I'm really passionate about it, because it's just crazy how like the entire body works synergistically. So basically, when you have inflammation, specifically gut inflammation, what it does is it makes your evening cortisol shoot up. So let's just talk about your circadian rhythm for a second. And I feel like thankfully it's been given a lot of attention in the last few years. So I feel like people have somewhat of an understanding of what a circadian rhythm is. But just to recap, a circadian rhythm is your day to night rhythm. So A healthy circadian rhythm starts with you waking up in the morning, feeling refreshed, feeling like you got enough sleep, and you don't have to necessarily jump out of bed, but you don't have to hit the snooze button 3 times to get out of bed. And then once you're out of bed, your energy levels are supposed to perk up. And then once they're up, you're supposed to be productive, energetic, creative. Like you have all these like juices flowing from something called a cortisol awakening response. So when you wake up in the morning, your cortisol is supposed to shoot up and then stay a little bit elevated, and then it's supposed to start dropping around 12 to 1. And then once it drops at 12 to 1, continues to drop until about 4 to 5, and that's when people start winding down. Like that, you usually hear about people crashing a little bit at 12 to 1 or like after work around like 4 or 5 p.m. And then it's supposed to stay low and continue to drop so that your cortisol is low enough to allow you to go to sleep. Cortisol is a stress hormone. It's good at the right time, at the right quantity, but it's bad if it's elevated at the wrong time. So it's not a bad hormone. You just want it to be high during the daytime and low in the evening. And then you have this other circadian rhythm, or like day to night rhythm, where in the morning your melatonin levels are supposed to be suppressed. And one of the main things that suppresses your melatonin is exposure to sunlight, ideally, not blue light. So then your melatonin is supposed to be suppressed. That's why it's recommended that people wake up and like sit outside for 10 minutes, because it just kind of gets you out of that like sleepy state, clears out all the melatonin, and then your melatonin is supposed to rise. So in the evening, cortisol is supposed to go down, and then melatonin is kind of supposed to cross over it and go up. And when you have this difference between cortisol and melatonin, that's what makes people sleepy and then able to fall asleep easily and able to stay asleep. When you have inflammation coming from the gut, it causes your cortisol at night to shoot up. So even if your melatonin is perfect, that's why people who take melatonin supplements may not, benefit from it. Because even if your melatonin is perfect, you don't have that big of a gap where you have this difference that allows you to settle down. Your cortisol is up. And when your cortisol is up at night, what does that look like? It looks like I'm overthinking, I'm worrying about my to-do list, I'm going through all the things that I did in the day, my mind can't calm down, and people think that's a lifestyle issue, but really there is a physical component. So when you treat the gut issue, you allow your cortisol to drop, so then you can, you don't have that like overthinking, wired, alert, agitation in the evening. So yeah, I just find that crazy that the body works that way.
Again, so important. The gut impacts our sleep, but also the brain and the way that we think can impact gut inflammation. So
Yeah.
I love how you always reiterate how everything is connected in some way.
Yeah.
Please share how many hours we're supposed to be getting, how many hours of sleep we're supposed to be getting, because a lot of people think that they deserve a medal for functioning at 6 hours of
I
sleep.
know.
And
I know.
you
That's
and
hustle
I,
culture. Yeah.
don't think that that's good.
Yeah, so we actually do need 7 to 9 hours of sleep. There was a time when research came out, or maybe health practitioners were saying that some people do function well on, like 5 to 6 hours, but the body does need 7 to 8 hours, because you need to go into several cycles of deep sleep. And more important than that, it's not really about the amount of hours you sleep, it's about the time that you sleep. So there's this brain detox pathway. It's called the glymphatic system. It's like the lymphatic system, but with a G. So this brain detox pathway works between 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. So if you're not asleep at those hours, like if you get into bed at 12 and then you fall asleep by 1 p.m., you're missing out on several hours of detoxification. And I don't think people understand how important brain toxicity is. Like when you don't clean out the waste in your brain, you also get a lot of inflammation. You get a little bit of like swelling, you get a lot of like mental symptoms, but you get brain fog as well, issues with concentration, issues with focus. And you see it in people who have cervical issues, so issues with their spine, like when like if they're on their phone for too long, or they have some issue with their neck. The flow of like fluids isn't that great. So then it causes like a buildup of like brain toxins. Doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get a disease, but it will definitely affect your day-to-day life. So 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. ideally you should be in bed before 11, so you can benefit from that.
And I think women need more sleep than men, right? Like we should be getting 8 to 9. I feel that way. I need my eight, and some days I
Me too.
feel incredible with 9. And I think
Yeah,
there is a small discrepancy between men and women, especially if we're on our luteal phase
for
or
sure.
we
There's
need more
always a
rest.
discrepancy. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I feel like women need more of everything. But, women are not represented in research that well. A lot of the information that we receive, based on studies is done on men, but women have cycles, their hormones changed on a 20, ideally on a 28 to 32 day cycle. But I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if women actually needed more hours. But honestly, the more deep sleep you can get, the better. Because that's also where your brain does all the repairs. It's where your brain produces growth hormone for recovery. It's where your brain produces and optimizes production of testosterone. So for men, it's equally, if not more important, because that's when all of their, like the important hormonal production happens. So people who are athletes, I know so many athletes who are, because they're so driven, like so on the go, they just don't prioritize their sleep. They'd rather just like go kill themselves at the gym and push their numbers. But sleep is where all the repair and recovery happens. So it's important for everyone, I think.
They say you get strong when you're resting and when you sleep. That's really
Exactly.
where,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
you have your
exactly.
gains.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. And well, I
I
just want to
know.
mention something about, sorry, not to interrupt you. Just want to mention something about, I'm working with a neurologist. She's teaching me a bunch of stuff about the importance of sleep. And there's like a massive correlation between like chronic pain, anxiety, nerve systems, nerve dysfunction, addiction, and sleep. Because when you get into the reparative sleep, you can normalize your brain hormones. Like that's one of the main things. I mean, that's one of several things. But if we don't get into deep reparative sleep, we don't get enough. We don't have a balance in something called acetylcholine, and acetylcholine controls your parasympathetic nervous system. So it controls your rest and digest nervous system. So if you don't have enough acetylcholine, it's very difficult for you to get into rest and digest. So you end up in fight or flight. And what are things that help people calm down or like put them into the parasympathetic state? It's eating comfort foods, nicotine, so like smoking and vaping. There's a massive addiction going around. Specifically nicotine, because it has a direct impact on acetylcholine. But if you don't get into deep reparative sleep, you don't have healthy levels of brain hormones, you end up resorting to addictive behaviors to calm down your nervous system.
I love that you also brought that through because we do have a smoking problem, an
Yeah.
emotional eating problem, an alcohol problem. Does it also impact the system in a similar way?
Yeah, yeah.
This is
I mean, addictions
dopamine,
in general. Yeah.
right? To calm the system, to offer some pleasure. And this is things that I
Exactly.
work with my clients. It's
Yeah.
like we're looking again, we know that ice cream's not healthy for us. 9 out of 10 times, I don't need to educate people on that. It's the odd person that I need to educate on what's healthy and unhealthy, but most people
Yeah.
know they're just seeking pleasure, joy, fun from their food because they lack it in their life.
Exactly.
Or
Exactly.
novelty, right? Like the brain
Exactly.
loves novelty, it loves excitement. They say that happiness is directly related to excitement. When we're happy, it's because we're excited about something. And if you
That's
lack
so
that
true.
because you're not happy at work or there's a relationship
Yeah.
or you're lonely, there's a lack of relationship or
Yeah.
lack of community, then we're reaching
True.
for the ice cream. But if you can
That's so
develop
true.
some of these emotional support systems that are healthier for you, you're less likely to reach for the ice cream
Yeah.
to
That's
help
so
calm and
true.
soothe the nervous
Yes.
system, like you're talking about.
Exactly.
I do want to talk a little bit about weight loss. It's quite a big subject, but I want to talk about it in relationship to cortisol, so high stress, and to sleep, because I know sleep directly impacts our weight gain slash loss goals, and I know cortisol has a lot of impact as well on the way that we distribute fat, maybe more so for women. I'm just gonna let you maybe.
Sleep impacts weight because of its effect on your insulin levels and your blood sugar management. So if you have one night of poor sleep, it has a direct impact on how well you manage your blood sugar. And you can see that in people who've experimented with themselves using continuous glucose monitors. And I've seen it myself, where even if you're eating the same food, your reaction to these foods in terms of blood sugar and insulin is much worse. So if you have someone who has like chronic sleep deprivation where, they're, I feel like especially in this day and age where we're expected to do so much. So like you have like a mom who's working but also has to take care of her kids and also has to take care of her household, or like a guy who has his like standard daytime job, but then he's also working on a business on the side. So I do feel like, and especially in Kuwait where there's this massive social component, which for me is what affected my sleep, to be honest, because once I finish everything I have to do for the day, I have to spend time with my family or my friends, just to maintain connection with people. So I feel like sleep gets pushed into the back burner a little bit. And when that happens, if you have like continuous sleep deprivation, even if you feel fine, you're not getting the amount of sleep that you need, you're going to have chronic issues with blood sugar management, which means you're probably going to develop insulin resistance. And, I mean, this is where, again, where you and I come together pretty well, because sometimes we'll share a client and you'll be like, are there any restrictions? Like, yeah, she has insulin resistance. We have to reduce her carbs to help her body like reset its insulin receptors, and start responding better to carbs. So with insulin, this has been studied, I just find it interesting when people go like, you can't target body fat. You actually can spot reduce if the spots that you tend to carry fat in are affected by hormones. So your belly fat is affected by insulin and cortisol. And the interesting thing is insulin and cortisol are blood sugar and cortisol are very related, which means insulin and cortisol are very related as well. There's actually this thing called the blood sugar and stress roller coaster. Before I get into the blood sugar and stress roller coaster, let's explain how cortisol and blood sugar cause belly fat. When you have insulin resistance, your body just stores fat around your belly, especially love handles. Like it's called the suprailiac. So it's like the sides of your belly. And then cortisol, it's this evolutionary response where if your body senses that you're in danger, it will break down your muscle. So it'll, especially peripheral. So it'll break down the muscle in your arms and your legs, and it will take that muscle, and it will store the food that you're eating as fat in your belly. So people who have insulin resistance tend to be apple shaped. So like their legs are really slim and their arms are really slim, but then they have like a tire around their waist. And so that's your cortisol person. And also other symptoms of high cortisol are people who have difficulty gaining muscle. So like they go to the gym, they train really hard, but then they're getting the muscle breakdown from the gym and the muscle breakdown from the cortisol. So even though they're training 4 to 5 times a week and hitting their protein targets, they're not gaining muscle because they're in this constant muscle breakdown. So yeah, belly fat is probably caused by either or and high cortisol and high blood sugar.
Belly fat, or like visceral fat, which is the fat around the belly and around the organs, which is one of the most dangerous fat stores on the body, yes. Right? Is it true that it actually can act like an endocrine system, like it's bioactive? It's
yes,
not just
it
fat
is.
that just
Exactly.
There, right? Can you explain that a bit to people?
Yeah. So people think that fat is, it's like you said, it's like an inactive organ, I guess. But it acts as, well, no, it's not an organ. It's adipocytes, it's cells. They think that they're inactive, but they actually cause inflammation. So belly fat increases your inflammatory levels. And one of the side effects of increased inflammatory markers is that testosterone converts to estrogen. I know we're veering off track a little bit. So that's why men who tend to have a lot of belly fat also have man boobs, because the belly fat increases inflammation, and then inflammation increases conversion of testosterone to estrogen. So men end up being, storing fat the way women do. That's why we have a lot of pear-shaped men in the Middle East, just because of all the processed foods, and like metabolic health issues. See?
That the visceral fat is an endocrine.
Yes. Yeah. And then fat in general is inflammatory. It's an inflammatory organ. It releases inflammatory cytokines, and it also releases estrogen. So it's funny because like if you're a slim female and you go through a menopause, you're going to have way more symptoms than someone who's chubby or overweight, because the slim female is losing the estrogen that she's producing and she doesn't have a lot of estrogen from the fat cells. But someone who's really overweight will not have that many symptoms of menopause because your fat cells are producing their own estrogen, whether or not your reproductive system is. And then that can have a lot of health implications, because if you have a lot of estrogen production from fat cells, then you can get something called estrogen dominance, which affects your cycle. It can give you heavier periods. Yeah, it can cause PMS. It can increase water retention, increases anxiety. Women that are always like I'm so puffy, I'm so swollen. It's probably related to that. And I tell people, like, the more fat cells you have, the more fluctuation you're going to see in your weight, because there's this constant communication and constant like inflammatory and hormone release that one day is going to make you a little bit more inflamed, one day is going to make you a little bit less inflamed.
How do you feel about this whole body positivity movement? Because, I mean, the work I do is all about that. I struggled with my
Yeah.
weight when I was in my 20s. I went up and down, and I'm all about like loving ourselves. I might have a
Yes.
client that has 40 kilos to lose, is super inflamed,
Yeah.
like, in the way that you're describing. And I will always share with him or her that we need to love ourselves and accept ourselves.
Yes, I agree.
However, I have a big problem with
Yes.
this movement. What do you
Me
think about
too.
it?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree with you. I have a big problem with the movement as well, because I feel like people use it as an excuse to not take care of their health. At the end of the day, whether you like it or not, having excess body fat affects your health in a million different ways. And, you know, ultimately, at the end of the day, we are in a culture that maybe does not favor bigger body types, unfortunately. So even if people have a lot of body positivity, it will still affect, I see it in my clients, it still affects their mental health. Like, I have clients who come in and they're like maybe 30 or 40 kilos overweight, and they're like, yeah, I'm here for my gut health. And then, maybe like as a side effect, if I lose weight, like that would be good. Like it's almost like they're ashamed to admit that they want to lose weight because of this body positivity movement. But ultimately, being overweight has just such a huge effect on your health. And really, if you look at people from the 70s, photos from like the 70s and 80s and 90s, it's very rare to find someone who's overweight. Most people are quite slim. And if you go to certain cultures, like if you go to Italy, or certain European countries, it's very rare to see someone for me, it's very rare for me to see someone who's overweight. So that should tell you something, that when we're in a healthy environment, consuming unprocessed foods, because, before, all the agricultural changes, when we're in a place where there's more community, because obviously now there's a lot of technology, so that kind of like gets in the way of community. When you're in a healthy state, your body does not want to hold on to excess body fat. So whether you love yourself or not, which of course we should love ourselves in all stages, because you don't want to work on anything from a place of hate. You want to work on everything from a place of love. And if you don't love it, I do feel like it's true. If you don't love yourself at a certain, weight or size or look, it's not likely that you're going to love yourself when you reach your goal. But yeah, ultimately, it's a sign that something is not, going right in your body, and you have to address it.
Because this body positivity movement is becoming a little extreme. Like, being a little
Yeah,
curvier and not just
yeah,
seeing, a size 0 on a magazine or
exactly,
Instagram is, I
exactly.
think, a good thing, because you
100%.
can be curvier and healthy. But then we're going into
Yeah,
obesity, and we're glorifying
exactly.
obesity.
Yeah,
And young girls
exactly.
and boys are being like, okay, this is okay, and I should love myself if I'm an XXXL. And we're actually promoting like diabetes and
Exactly. A
metabolic
hundred
dysfunction.
percent. 100%.
And that's
It's, yeah,
so dangerous,
it is
So
so
I think it went a
dangerous.
bit extreme.
Yeah, I
Um,
totally agree with you.
I want to go to the other side and talk about skinny fat, because there are a lot of skinny people, or people with a six pack,
Yeah.
or people who look amazing and they're lean and they're toned, they look like a model, and they're actually metabolically not well. So, can we
Yes.
talk a little bit about skinny fat and what that means and what that looks like?
Yeah, I feel like I've been seeing an increase in skinny fat. I think especially with the Ozempic trend, where people are kind of prioritizing just being slim or like the number on the scale, especially because I feel like skinny's back in now. It's been for like, I've seen it for like the last year or last year and a half. So when people prioritize being smaller or just, idealizing a number on a scale, the main way people do that is through under eating. So whether that's through the support of injectables like Ozempic, or just starvation diets, they're more likely to lose muscle than fat. And I've actually seen that. I have several friends who have taken Ozempic, and I see their body composition just change in like the most unhealthy way. And unfortunately, even though they'll get that slim look thereafter, they're not going to get this toned, fit, healthy appearance. And no matter, like, when it comes to weight loss, you always want to spare muscle, because muscle has been deemed an organ of longevity. So there's a lot of metabolic processes that happen in muscle. You get, you process carbohydrates. The more muscle you have, the better metabolic health you have in general. So yeah, I just feel like people shouldn't be focusing on the number on the scale. Body composition is really where it's at. It's, you don't want to just look skinny. You want to have lower body fat and higher muscle mass. And I've been seeing a lot of people that are slim, but their body fat is in the 30s, which, like if it's over 31%, it's considered obese, which is kind of crazy. So you have skinny people that have the body composition of an obese person. And also, let's not forget that, there are people that can eat whatever they want, quote unquote, and not gain weight. And I've had those people as well as clients, where they're like, they actually want to gain weight. They're like, I eat everything and I still can't gain weight. And it's almost always a digestive issue. Like, their body's just not absorbing, like their gut is not in a healthy enough place to absorb the nutrients that they're eating. So even though it's not reflecting on the scale, the food is still inflammatory. It's still having the same effect on their microbiome. It's still having the same effect on their mental health. It's still having the same effect on their blood sugar management and their metabolic health. So yeah, I feel like we should really move away from the number on the scale. And I know you do that with your clients as well. I just had a client that we shared, and she was like, I worked with Alia, and she told me, throw the scale away. For the first 3 months, we're working on habits and health. She's like, I don't even want you to look at the scale, because it's true. It's so important.
They look every day, and there's fluctuations, and there's a mood and a self-worth that's attached to this number.
Exactly.
And like, this number is informative, like a
Exactly.
blood test is.
Yeah,
And we'll
exactly.
get on it at some point, because you need to have a good relationship with the scale.
True.
I don't want you to never look at the scale or never get on it and be afraid of it. But in the beginning, when we're working on this, I also want them to build like intuition and feel.
That's
Do I feel
so
bloated?
true.
Do I
That's
feel
so
light?
true. Yeah.
I don't want the scale to tell you that. I want you to feel how food makes you feel,
Exactly.
So I do say that, especially in the beginning.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are a lot of lean people in my life as well who have gut problems or cholesterol problems or,
Yeah.
mental issues, and they try to eat healthy, but then they just will indulge a little bit more because it doesn't
Yeah.
show on their body.
Exactly. That's so
And it's
true. Yeah,
almost like
that
a
used to be
blessing and a
me.
curse.
100%. 100% that used to be me. I would like eat really healthy, and then I'd eat like a slice of cake, and I'd be like, it's not affecting me. It's not bothering me. But then obviously when I got more into functional medicine, I have learned to move away from that. And honestly, like, it's funny because people don't really realize how bad they feel because they're so used to it. You don't know how many times I've had a client, like, when I go through their history, I'm like, like, do you experience any bloating? Do you experience this? They're like, no, I feel fine. I don't have any issues with my gut health. I don't have any issues with this. My energy levels are good. And then we'll do like an elimination diet for, for one issue or another. And they'll come back and they'll be like, I had no idea that I was actually bloated, because now I know what it's like to be not bloated. Now I know what it feels like to be not bloated. So really don't underestimate the effect of inflammatory food on your health, because even if you think you're fine, you're probably 60% of what of your functional capacity when it comes to mood and health and energy and sleep. Even like because of inflammation, sleep improves as well, which means your energy improves, which means your mood improves, which means your productivity and brain function improves. So it's not to be underestimated.
And so your business improves and your relationships
Exactly.
improve.
Yeah, it's like this huge domino effect.
Yeah, it's like we need to eat healthy to like help the planet almost.
Yeah, exactly,
Have better
exactly.
people on the planet.
Yeah, yeah.
I do want to touch on something around food habits, snacking and like the MMC and bloating, and how all that could possibly be related for some people, maybe not for everyone. Could you maybe
Okay.
talk about snacking and why it can be
Yes.
not helpful for some, but maybe helpful for
Yes.
others, and what the difference is
Sure.
between those people?
So I think it's not really about like the term snacking or the act of snacking, but really how often you're doing it and how close to your food you're doing it. So I think maybe grazing is a better word. Grazing is probably much worse for you than snacking. So the reason snacking is not, or grazing is not so good for your gut health is because after we eat, we have this complex called a migrating motor complex that comes in and sweeps all the food that you ate throughout your digestive tract. So you want to think of it as, like when we used to go to the ice rink, and then we'd skate around, and then we'd have to get off, and then this Zamboni has to come in and has to like clear out the ice and smooth it all over again so that you're able to skate again. It's the same thing. It's this thing that comes in as soon as you're done eating, and it takes 3 to 4 hours for the sweeping process to happen. And this is really important for maintaining gut health, because if you snack or if you kind of interrupt this 3 to 4 hour process, either too early or too consistently, you don't sweep away all the debris from the food. And when the debris from the food stays stuck around, you're giving opportunities for bacteria to continue feeding when it's supposed to be, like when they're supposed to be in a fasted state. The fasted and fed state completely affects your microbiome as well. So, we were talking about those two populations. There's the Bacteroidetes and the Firmicutes. They're supposed to be in a healthy ratio. Some of the bacteria in your gut flourish in a fasted state, and some of the bacteria in your gut flourish in a fed state. So you have to give both of these bacteria ample time. So you want to be fasting in between meals. So basically try to avoid snacking at least 2 to 3 hours in between meals. And it's, even for your blood sugar, it's much better to kind of add your snack directly after your main meal.
Which is not a snack anymore. Then it's kind of like dessert.
Oh,
right?
Yeah, it's dessert. Yeah, true. Yes.
Kind of compartmentalizing feeding times. And
Yes,
grazing,
exactly.
the definition of that would be like constant nibbling, right?
Exactly. And I feel like that's where your work is also really important, because you teach people how to eat until they're full in a main meal. And I also do that with my meal plans. Like I even tell my clients, if you're hungry, tell me. I don't want you to be hungry. Like that's not the goal. Even when it comes to weight loss, you want to eat to a point where you feel so satisfied you don't feel the need to graze and nibble. When I was tracking my blood sugar, I noticed that my blood sugar would spike after a big meal. So then in an attempt to reduce my blood sugar spike, I started eating less at my main meals. But with that, what would happen is I'd still be hungry. So I'd eat like a small piece of, like a nuts or like dark chocolate thing, like an hour later. And then I'd nibble a little bit on something else, and I'd nibble a little bit on something else, which kept my blood sugar kind of like sporadically like goes up and goes down throughout the day. And it wasn't good for my gut health either. So it was just really insightful for me to see like, oh wow, like when I don't eat until I'm full at a main meal, I'm snacking 3 times in the next 2 hours, which is very unlike me.
And not helpful for gut health and not helpful for weight loss.
Exactly.
Right?
And then also, so like when you give, just to continue on my point, when you give bacteria ample time to grow, it can cause SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, which is when bacteria grow in a place they're not supposed to grow. And then when you have SIBO, you have all this extra bacterial activity, which is basically, bacteria fermenting your food. So you get extra gas and extra bloating and extra trapped gas and extra flatulence. You have people burping. So do not graze. Try to eat until you're full. And if you're going to snack, just do it like 2 hours after a meal, not like an hour and then another hour and then another 30 minutes.
Yeah. I sometimes say the exception to this rule is our athletes, people training like athletes who need that extra meal, like they've had lunch at 1 and dinner's at 7, and they need something like a small meal, like an apple with nuts at 5.
Yes, true.
Right? 'Cause they're really going with carbs,
Exactly.
like they're burning glucose. Or, and I might be wrong here, so maybe just jump in and tell me what you think. The really lean person who's eating very well, but just goes through their food energetically quite fast, like high metabolism, and they can't eat the volume of food that like I can eat.
True.
So they eat a very well balanced meal, but they can't finish it the way I can.
True.
So they're more likely to be hungry in 3 hours, where I can go 5 or 6.
But 3 hours is great. 3 hours is still good. It's the like every 30 minutes, every hour, every, like being peckish and stuff like that. So yes, I totally agree. I mean, I'm one of these people. I'm not a volume eater. There are people that are volume eaters. Like I like to eat smaller foods spread throughout the day. So totally agree.
Okay. Amazing. Well, Lulu, is there any tips or last pieces of information or advice you'd like to share with someone who's just starting off on their gut health journey, maybe even weight loss journey or mental health journey, that you think are super important and you want to leave people with at the end of
Yeah. Honestly, I feel like focusing, I know we talked about like stool testing and comprehensive testing and so on and so forth. Which, speaking of, if you really do have chronic symptoms and you've tried to address it through nutrition and you've tried to take some supplements and you've tried to take digestive enzymes and you've gone to doctors, or if you have this like chronic mental health issue that's not non-respondent to medication, it's treatment resistant, or you have issues with insomnia or any kind of like chronic health issue that you can't seem to treat, even though you're doing everything right with your lifestyle, then you most likely need to do comprehensive testing, a little bit more advanced functional testing. You probably have an underlying root cause. It's not your fault. Your body's just a little dysfunctional and you just need to bring it back to balance. And then just also don't underestimate lifestyle habits. So, when you have, I recently posted about this. If you have gut issues, things that can go a long way are lifestyle habits, like putting yourself into a parasympathetic nervous system, like rest and digest. So you do 10 deep breaths before you eat every meal. Chewing your food thoroughly so that you're not putting more of a burden on your digestive system to break down food. Waiting 2 to 3 hours in between meals or snacks. Getting sunlight in the mornings to help, set your circadian rhythm. Doing a 12-12 fasting, which is not detrimental to women. I think the hours that are detrimental to women are like if they're fasting 14-10 or 16-8, according to their cycle. So yeah, don't underestimate the power of your daily habits. Opt for an anti-inflammatory lifestyle. It's going to have a massive downstream effect on everything that you do. And if you need help and if you need advanced support, seek out a functional practitioner.
And something I'd like to add is, we talked a lot about gut health, and when people hear about the gut, they think probiotics.
Yes.
And I always say, there are lots of amazing probiotics out there, and sometimes it is a shot in the dark, and you got to find the one that works for you or work with a practitioner like yourself to help someone. But I always say one of the best probiotics is exercise. And so
That's so true. Yeah.
right? So like coming into lifestyle, it's like stop glorifying busy so much and hustle
Yes.
culture, learning to breathe
So
before a
true.
meal, slowing down,
Yeah.
stop processed foods. If people are drinking Coca-Cola every single day and they take that out, that will
Exactly.
have a huge ripple
True.
effect on their
True.
life, right?
Yeah.
And then it's
Yeah.
exercise, right?
That's
In a
so
way,
true.
it supports gut. Do you want to maybe speak on that a little bit? Like how exercise is a really healthy like probiotic? Because people are
Yeah.
like,
I
oh,
mean,
gut
yeah.
health. I want to pop a pill. It's like it's not always the pill that's
I
going to help you.
agree. Yeah,
Yeah.
and also actually probiotics are sometimes make people's symptoms worse because if you already have SIBO, if you already have bacterial overgrowth, if you add in even the healthiest probiotic, just having that extra bacterial activity can actually make your symptoms worse. So almost take it as a diagnostic tool. If you take probiotics and you feel worse, you probably have bacterial overgrowth to begin with. So it's not great for everyone. And also just on the topic of probiotics, people tend to find one probiotic and they stick to it. You need to diversify. You need to keep your microbiome diverse. So when you finish a bottle of a probiotic, switch over to a different bottle and then switch over to a different bottle and then go back to the one that you like, that you were using in the first place. So cycling probiotics is really important. But then on the topic of exercise, it's the same thing. They did a study on people where they looked at their microbiome before an exercise, before a workout and after a workout, and there was a positive improvement in their microbial balance. And generally speaking, like people who exercise have less incidence of IBS. A really good treatment approach for IBS is increasing your exercise levels. So there is a direct impact between exercise and movement and your microbiome. Not to mention mental health and serotonin levels.
Right. And
Yeah.
exercise doesn't need to be a HIIT class every single day. It can be
True.
walking a lot. It can
True.
be,
Yeah.
resistance
Yoga,
training where
mobility.
exactly
Yeah.
Pilates, like all kinds of things, just as long as we're moving the body, right?
Yeah.
To impact gut health.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being here. Why don't you tell everyone where they can find you, your
Thanks
Instagram
for having
handle,
me.
maybe website where people can, yeah, reach
Thanks
out
for
to you.
having me. Yeah, this was so great, and I look forward to having more discussions. I know there's more things that we want to touch
Yeah,
upon, but I feel like we did really good for like
yeah.
as a comprehensive overview of everything. So my Instagram is @thefunctionalnutritionist, and my number for bookings is on my bio. A lot of people sometimes DM me and they're like, can I book a session with you? It literally says to book, contact this number. So that's the best way.
In the notes.
Yes, thank you. So that's the best way to get a session. And then also, feel free to contact me about anything. But that's my main form of communications, Instagram or my work phone.
Do you work with people that aren't based in Kuwait? Like, do you do Zoom calls for non-Kuwait based?
Yes. I'd say like 30% of my clientele are international, 40 maybe.
Amazing. All right. Well, thank you so much, Lulu. This was such
Thanks
a great
for having
conversation.
me. Yeah, it was. I'm
your
excited.
insights.
My
This was
pleasure.
awesome.
My pleasure. Thanks. Have a great day. Yeah, looking forward to the next one. Okay, take care.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. Please share with family and friends that you feel could benefit from this episode, and make sure to hit that subscribe button and leave a rating and review to support the show. Check out the links below for more information about my guests and where to find them, and make sure you're following me on Instagram at wholesome_practice to learn more about what I do. I appreciate you being here, and I'll see you on the next one.